Tonight, you'll enter a special experience, a journey that Zen masters have been quietly passing down for more than 1,000 years. These profound stories contain an almost magical power to soothe anxiety and bring your mind back to complete stillness. I'm going to share 16 timeless Zen stories, stories that have changed the lives of countless people. Each story is a small door, opening another depth of your consciousness, leading you to the deepest resting place of your soul. These are not just bedtime stories, but ancient keys that open the way to the peace that your heart is looking for. Whether you are carrying the worries of tomorrow, still wondering about today's story, or simply feeling restless, having trouble sleeping, these teachings will come to you right where you are. What makes this journey so special is its lightness. You don't need to understand Buddhism, nor do you need any meditation experience. The Buddha once taught that wisdom will naturally manifest when we listen with an open heart. Tonight, as we walk into the stories together, of a samurai finding paradise, of monks learning the power of silence, and masters revealing the treasure within, you will feel something moving deep within you. The breathing became slower, the shoulders lightened, and the silent tension began to dissipate. Then, slowly, naturally, you will find yourself drifting into a peaceful space, where all thoughts melt away and only gentle stillness remains. Now, let your body completely relax. Inhale deeply. And as you exhale, believe that ancient wisdom is quietly beginning its work. The soldier and the gate of heaven. In ancient Japan, when the cherry blossom groves were in full bloom, the whole mountain seemed to be dressed in a soft pink and white robe. In this quiet setting, a samurai named Nobushiga walks on a winding stone path that leads to a Zen temple deep in the middle of the forest. He came to meet the famous Zen master Hakuin, whose fame had spread throughout the region as a sage who possessed the light of enlightenment. The sound of the pagoda bell rang somewhere, echoing through the mist of the morning. The sound blends with the wind, echoing in the air, as if calling the traveler to return to himself. But Nobushiga didn't come here to find tranquility. He carried with him a question that had haunted him for years, a question that no victory on the battlefield could answer. The figure of the warrior exudes toughness and self-control. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword naturally, a habit of the years that had always lived between the boundaries of life and death. His face was cold, his eyes were bright and vigilant, and he bore the pride of the samurai class, those who live by honor and are willing to die for it. Upon entering the rustic shrine, Nobushiga saw the Zen master Hakuin sitting motionless. The morning light crept through the wooden door frame and shone on the ground, surrounding him with a soft light. In that moment, the soldier felt like time had stopped. He bowed his head slightly and then spoke with the strong voice of someone who was used to giving orders. "Master, I have come to ask you something that has been bothering me for so long. Is there really a heaven and a hell?" Hakuin opened his eyes, staring at him intently. The old teacher's gaze was deep, but calm as the surface of a lake without ripples. He was silent for a long time and then asked, "Who are you?" Nobushiga puffed out his chest, his voice full of pride. "I'm a samurai. I serve my lord with honor and am willing to die for my country." Hakuin was still looking at him, but his expression suddenly changed. His voice became cold, like a knife cutting into the self-esteem of the other person. "You, a samurai?" he said, smirking slightly. "What master would entrust his life to someone like you? Look at you. It's like a beggar with a sword, a despicable person." The insult fell on Nobushiga like an invisible sword. His face flushed with anger. His hand trembled slightly, and his index finger unconsciously slid towards the hilt of the sword. In his heart, a fierce fire broke out, burning all notions of calmness. But Hakuin continued, his voice even more sarcastic. "And is that your sword? Maybe it's not even sharp enough to cut a piece of rice cake, let alone my head. It's a shame for someone who calls himself a warrior." That insult was beyond the limit of Nobushiga's tolerance. He shouted loudly, pulling out his sword from its sheath, and the steel light flashed in the quiet room. For a moment, he just wanted to slash down the man standing in front of him, the one who had insulted his honor, the greatest pride of his life. But at that moment, Hakuin said quietly, his voice strangely calm, "Here, that's when the gates of hell open." The sound resounded like lightning in the sky. In an instant, Nobushiga stopped, and the sword stopped floating in midair. That sentence pierced his anger like light through the night, waking him up from his blindness. He suddenly understood. All the anger, the humiliation, the pride that had just flared up, it didn't come from the outside world. They come from himself, from the mind that can't bear to be touched by the fragile self. And in that very rage, he saw hell unfold within him. That realization was so strong that tears flowed from the corners of the warrior's eyes. He trembled and lowered his sword, fell to his knees on the ground, and bowed deeply to his teacher. Hakuin smiled gently. And now the gates of heaven are open, the Buddha once taught. Holding on to anger is like holding a hot coal in your hand with the intention of throwing it at others. But you are the one who gets burned. Heaven and hell are not far away. They are not external places, but states of mind, worlds created by our own consciousness. So why do people easily open the door of hell within themselves? Meditation points out that it comes from three deep causes. The first cause is our attachment to the ego, to the image of who we think we are. Nobushiga believed absolutely in the role of an honorary samurai. When Hakuin insults it, his entire sense of self-worth is threatened, and his reaction instinct flares up violently. When others challenge the story we tell about ourselves, we react in the same way. We get angry when we are looked down upon, narcissistic when we are criticized, or we feel hurt when someone doesn't recognize our efforts. It is that weak self that opens the door for anger to burn. The second reason is the ancient survival instinct. In the past, when our ancestors were faced with wild animals and danger, the brain was programmed to react as soon as there were signs of threat. But in modern society, the threat is no longer a fangs or a sword, but words, attitudes, and looks. And so, instead of fighting to survive, we fight to protect our fragile selves. As long as someone interrupts us while driving, rejects our opinion in a meeting, or shows disrespect, those old mechanisms immediately kick in. Adrenaline surges, breathing rushes, body prepares for battle, even if enemy is just a word. The third cause is a misunderstanding of emotions. We often believe that others make us angry, but in reality, they only touch the wound that is inherent within us. The anger does not come from them, but from the way we interpret what they say, the way we react to it. Hakuin didn't create Nobushiga's hell at all. He only lifted the veil so that he could see the fire that was already burning in his heart. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh once taught, "When someone makes you suffer, it's because they are suffering deep within themselves. They don't need punishment. They need help." That saying is also a reminder for each of us. When we get angry, it's usually because there's something hurting in us. A fear, an old memory, an unhealed wound. Others just accidentally touch it. Think back to the last time you were angry, when someone criticized, denied, or ignored you. In that moment, what opened up in your mind? Rage, feelings of being insulted, fear of being looked down upon. It was at that moment that the doors of hell were opened. The Buddha taught, "You will not be punished for your anger, but you will be punished by that very anger." That punishment is immediate, in the body, in the soul. When angry, the heart rate increases rapidly, muscles stiffen, and breathing becomes heavy. Thoughts become blurred, words become sharp, and compassion gradually disappears. We lose our inner peace and burn ourselves in a fire that we light ourselves. But in Hakuin's lesson, there is something deeper. The very moment of opening the door of hell can also be the moment of opening the door of heaven. Just change one thing: perception. The moment Nobushika realized what was going on in his mind, the whole reality changed. He was no longer an angry warrior, but a humble student. The scene had not changed, but the world inside him had changed completely. That's the magic of mindfulness, the ability to see emotions clearly without dissolving into them. When we can observe the anger rising within us, we are no longer controlled by it. We can choose, react, or let go. Meditation does not teach us to suppress our emotions, but teaches us to see through them. When we recognize anger, we take a step out of it. With time and practice, we begin to see the early signs: chest tightening, heat rising, hands clenched, mind contraction. If we stop, take a deep breath, and fully recognize that feeling, we can prevent the gates of hell from opening. Moments that make us angry, belittled, misunderstood, interrupted, are actually opportunities for free practice. They show us that we are still being dominated by something and help us learn to let go. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 empty words is a word that brings peace." Every time we choose not to react, every time we respond to anger with patience, criticism with understanding, irreverence with dignity, we are opening the gates of heaven, not only for ourselves, but for others. The story of Nobushika and Hakuin is a mirror that reflects on the human heart. It reminds us that hell and heaven are not far away. They are always open in every breath, every reaction, every little choice. Heaven is not the place we go to after death, but the space we create every time we are awake. And sometimes, just a second of realization, a moment of pause, a deep breath, the gates of heaven have opened. In ancient Japan, when the winding dirt roads were covered with bamboo bushes and the temple bells rang in the morning mist, there was a judge who was famous throughout the Edo region named Uka Tadasuke. Folk often refer to him briefly as Judge Uka, a man whose intellect is as sharp as a sword, but who behaves with kindness and a sense of humor that makes people admire. Uka is not only good at judging, but she also has an uncanny ability, seeing the truth in places where others see only the absurd. And the story of the captured Buddha statue is one of the clearest demonstrations of that wisdom. The merchant and the fateful sleeper. On a summer afternoon, when the sun is shining through the pine groves, a middle-aged merchant named Genshiro is on his way from Kyoto to Edo. On his horse was 50 rolls of pure white cotton, a precious cotton that was finely woven, light, and many times more expensive than ordinary goods. It was all the property he had collected to bring to the capital to trade. After many tiring days on the road, Genshiro stopped under the shadow of a stone Buddha statue on the side of the road. The statue had been there for so long that it was covered with green moss, but his face was still gentle, as if he was smiling at the world. Genshiro sat down, leaning back against the stone platform, and let out a sigh of relief. The wind blows gently through the bamboo forest, bringing with it a cool scent. The chirping of ticks lull him to sleep. When I opened my eyes, the sun was already setting to the west. He stood up, adjusted his luggage, and was stunned. 50 rolls of cotton disappeared. His heart pounded, his eyes rolled around. There was no one, only the Buddha statue sitting silently looking down. Genshiro burst into despair. The entire capital disappeared after just one sleep. Go to Judge Uka. With no other choice, Genshiro rushed to the palace of Judge Uka, who was famous for his fair trial. The large gate of the palace opened, and 2 rows of soldiers stood guard solemnly. Genshiro fell to his knees, tears in his eyes telling him everything. Uka sat and listened quietly, his face as calm as a lake. When the merchant finished his story, he asked, "You said you slept under the Buddha statue on the side of the road, right?" "Yes, that's right. I only took a nap for a while, and when I woke up, the cotton was gone." "And there's no one around?" "No, sir. Only the Buddha statue is there." Uka nodded, his eyes flashing with an incomprehensible mischief. He pondered for a while, and then said in a serious voice, "Then, the Buddha statue is the only witness in this case." The whole courtroom was silent. The letterman, who was taking notes again, almost dropped the pen. Genshiro looked at him, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. But Uka turned to the guards and ordered, "You go to the temple on the side of the road immediately and take the Buddha statue into custody for investigation." Captured Buddha statue. The news spread throughout Edo in just half a day. People pulled together to watch. An unprecedented sight. Four soldiers carry a heavy stone Buddha statue across the street, followed by a laughing crowd. "Judge Uka must be crazy this time," someone said. "Or does he want to joke with the people?" Another guessed. When the Buddha statue was placed in front of the palace gate, Uka kept a stern expression. He sent someone to place the statue in the middle of the courtyard, covering it with a red cloth like a felon. More and more people came to watch, and the whispers echoed everywhere. Some people laughed loudly, pointing to the statue. Uka stepped out, looked around the crowd, and tapped the hammer on the table. "What are you laughing at?" he asked. A young man laughed and replied, "Sir, it's just a stone statue. Why are you taking it to trial?" Uka nodded and said slowly, "You despise the court. You despise justice. Each person here will have to submit a roll of cotton within 3 days, otherwise they will be heavily fined." The laughter stopped completely. The crowd was stunned. Everyone bowed their heads and quietly withdrew. The absurd game of intellect. 3 days passed, and the whole of Edo was in turmoil. One by one, afraid of being fined, brought cotton to submit to the Uka government. Some people submitted one, some submitted two, so much so that they piled up a mountain in the middle of the yard. On the afternoon of the third day, Genshiro, the poor merchant, was called. He looked at the huge pile of cotton in front of him in amazement. Among the hundreds of rolls of cotton, his eyes suddenly stopped at a roll with its own stitch, a small thread that only he could recognize. "Sir," he cried, "this is my cotton roll." Uka smiled. "Are you sure?" "Yes, I will sew this seal myself before I leave." "Then let's see who brought it to submit." The soldier immediately checked the notebook. The person who brought the roll was a cloth merchant in the southern market, which was famous for its tricks. Uka arrested that person. After a few questions, he trembled and confessed everything. That day, he passed through that road, saw the merchant asleep, stole all the cotton, and later panicked because of Uka's orders, so he brought a part of it to be submitted to avoid suspicion. The case is closed, the thief is caught, and all the cotton is returned to Genshiro. Words and lessons. The next day, when the people gathered in front of the palace again, Uka came out and looked at everyone with kind eyes. "The other day, you laughed when I caught the Buddha statue, but it was because of that the truth came out." He turned to Genshiro and continued, "The statue does not speak, but makes the guilty speak for itself. Justice sometimes needs a farce to spark wisdom. If we keep looking for reason within the framework, we may never see what is hidden in people's hearts." The people bowed their heads and were silent. From the crowd, someone said quietly, "Mr. Uka is indeed a man who understands the Tao." The judge just smiled. He sent someone to bring the Buddha statue back to the old place on the side of the road. When the statue was put down, he folded his hands and bowed his head, saying quietly, "Thank you, sir, for helping me teach the people this lesson." As time passed, the story spread throughout the Edo region. People recount it with a mixture of interest and admiration. The children laughed because the Buddha statue was captured, but the adults understood that Uka did not capture the statue. He only captured the stupidity and arrogance of people. Genshiro later opened a large store in the capital. Every time a visitor asks about the theft in the past, he just laughs. Thanks to the Buddha statue, I have learned two things. One is not to sleep without tying up the property, and the other is to never underestimate the absurdity. because in it, sometimes the wisdom of the wise man is hidden. The people of Edo also remember Uka's words. The truth does not always wear the shirt of reason. Sometimes it comes in the form of the most stupid of things. Since then, every time someone says or does something like no other that is ultimately true, people smile and tell each other, that's Uka's wisdom, the wisdom that laughs in the midst of absurdity. Aftersound. In the autumn of that year, people saw the Buddha statue on the side of the road being cleaned of moss by the people, and a bowl of fresh lotus flowers was placed at their feet. Someone passed by and said softly, "You were arrested, but thanks to that, the thief was exposed." Strangely, justice sometimes has to put on the cloak of paradox. In the afternoon, the silhouette stretched on the ground. The golden sunlight fell on the stone face, making his smile seem brighter than ever, as if the Buddha was also smiling at the wisdom of man, a wisdom that uses absurdity to illuminate the truth. Judge Uka's story of Arrest of the Buddha is not just a humorous anecdote, but a profound lesson in how to look beyond the box. Justice, if it only relies on superficial reasonableness, will sometimes miss the truth that lies deep in people's hearts. But with enough wisdom and trust, then even an absurd action can become a mirror that reflects the true nature of the world. Soldiers of humanity. On the mountainside east of the capital, there is an ancient pagoda called Shan San Temple. The pagoda is hidden in the middle of a deep green pine forest. Every early morning, the mist covers the stone pedestal. The bell rings like an echo of heaven. Passers-by often stop, only to bow their heads in front of the mossy, curved tile roof, where they say that there is a Zen master who has lived for 40 years and has not left the temple gate, only using his eyes to penetrate people's hearts. His name was Zen Master Gasan. Legend has it that he talks little, eats little, and only eats one vegetable porridge a day. But anyone who enters the temple feels like time is slowing down. The anger dissipated, and the echo in his heart also subsided. Someone said, "Just looking at Gasan once, I see my heart as a mirror being cleaned." But then there are times when life does not allow people to be alone in the forest. That year, fighting broke out on the border. The imperial court dispatched troops everywhere, from the downstream to the upstream. Wherever the soldiers passed, they had to set up camp, cook rice, and rest. One afternoon, when the sun was already red behind the mountain, a royal army pulled to the foot of Shansan Pagoda. The army was large, the road dust was foggy, and the sound of horses' hooves hitting the cliff was like thunder. A captain rode along, his iron armor gleaming, and his eyes swept around as if he wanted to swallow the scenery. He pointed. "There is a pagoda here. There is spring water. Stay here tonight." Soldiers cheered, took off their bags, and gathered the kitchen right in the temple yard. The sound of laughter and the jingle of knives and pots broke the silence. The monks still sat still, just looking at each other and smiling. The captain entered the Buddhist palace, saw the incense of smoke wafting on the board, and the statue of Shakyamuni sitting quietly on the lotus. He frowned. "Damn, who is the abbot here?" A little boy bowed his head. "Yes, my master, Gasan. Call me here. I want to meet you." Gasan walked out, thin but his eyes as bright as the water of a deep well. The captain looked around, his voice gruff. "We are soldiers of the imperial court, and we need lodging and food when we pass through here. I hope the pagoda helps." The Zen master folded his hands. "The door of the temple is always open. Please stay and eat rice and vegetables with us." "Vegetable rice?" The captain frowned. "The imperial army can't eat that frugal thing. We need white rice, meat, fish, and wine to keep the soldiers strong." Gasen said softly, "In the temple, there is only vegetable porridge and spring water. If you don't criticize, please invite." The captain was angry. "Do you despise the emperor's army? We hold the sword for the country. Our lives are on the battlefield. Yet you only offer vegetable porridge as an alms to beggars?" Monk Gassen did not change his face, just looked at him for a long time and replied, "Sir, we are also soldiers. The only difference is we don't fight with the sword." The captain grinned. "Soldiers? You sit and chant all day. Do you know what fighting is?" "We are the soldiers of mankind," said the Zen master, his voice still calm, "fighting to save all beings from suffering." The sentence fell into the space like a bell and then gradually dissipated in the afternoon mist. The captain paused, unable to answer. He looked around, monks washing vegetables by the well, a few little boys scooping water, kitchen smoke rising lightly. That simple scene suddenly made him feel strange. Night fell. The moon rises on the roof of the pagoda. Insects whisper. The soldiers after the vegetable porridge, which everyone criticized at first, sat in contemplation. No one spoke. One soldier muttered, "That's strange. There is no wine, no meat, but why do I feel warm in my stomach?" Another nodded, "It feels like eating in peace. Maybe it's because he cooks to his heart's content." In the palace, Gassan sat in front of the Buddha statue, his eyes half closed. His breathing was steady, like the rhythm of a stream out there. He was neither angry nor happy, only quietly knowing that the seed of knowledge had fallen into the hearts of the soldiers. The next morning, as the army was about to leave, the captain walked to the front of the temple. He bowed his head very low, which he thought was impossible last night. Gassan asked, a gentle smile at the corner of his mouth, "The largest service does not need high chairs, just wide hearts." The Zen master nodded slightly. When people's hearts are wide enough, all borders are dissolved. The captain looked up at the Buddha statue and suddenly saw that his face seemed to be smiling. He turned around and ordered the soldiers, "Leave some rice and salt for the pagoda." Then he added quietly, just to listen, "Someday, I want to come back here, not with a sword, but with a peace of mind." Since that day, soldiers passing through the area have all recounted. In Shanshan, there is a monk who speaks in few words, which makes the sword-bearer feel light. The people called him a general without a sword, because he did not go to battle, but still made the soldiers bow their heads. The story spread throughout the city, all the way to the imperial court. Someone asked, "A monk, what do you use to save humanity in the midst of turmoil?" One of Gassan's students replied, "The teacher said, Many years later, when the country was quiet, the old captain returned to the pagoda. He is now gray-haired, no longer holding a sword in his hand, carrying only a bunch of incense sticks and some dry tea." Zen Master Gassan was still sitting in the same place, only thinner, his eyes still as clear as a stream. The two looked at each other, smiled, and didn't need words. "In the past, you taught me that you are soldiers of mankind." "Yes," replied Gassan, "but not to win anyone, but to keep one's heart from losing." The captain was silent for a long time. Then he put down the bundle of incense and said softly, "That day, your vegetable porridge was the best meal in my life." Gassan smiled, his eyes as gentle as the moonlight on the top of the mountain. "Because when you eat in peace, everything tastes good." When the old guest left, the little uncle asked him, "Teacher, why do people call us soldiers of mankind?" The Zen master looked up at the Buddha statue and said softly, "Because every breath I take is a battle with myself, with anger, greed, ignorance. If you win those three things, there will be no one left to fight." Then he knocked softly, and the sound of the cup echoed far away in the middle of the forest, gradually spreading like a prayer to all the soldiers out there who were still fighting, not to occupy the land, but to find peace in their own hearts. The largest serving doesn't need high chairs, just a wide puck. Because when we fight not for ourselves, but for people, every smallest action becomes sacred. The emperor and the coin can't lose. In the ancient land of the East, when the wind still carried the pine fragrance from the mountains and the temple bells still echoed on the hillsides, there was an emperor named Goyoze. He rules with discipline and wisdom, but deep down, there is still an insecurity in his heart. Even though he has power over 10,000 people, he still does not understand himself. For many years, he sought out Taoists, scholars, and Zen masters, hoping to find the answer to the question, is this mind a Buddha? But each person comes up with a different way of saying it. Some people say, the mind is the Buddha. Others say, the mind is nothing. The more he listened, the more confused he became. One afternoon, when he heard that the Zen master Gudo, a famous virtuous monk, was living in seclusion in the eastern mountains, the emperor sent someone to invite him to the palace. But Gudo refused, only replying, "If your majesty wants to find the Buddha, please go to where the Buddha is." Surprised, the emperor personally left. He left his entourage outside the temple gate and entered the small meditation room, where Gudo was sitting quietly in front of a simple wooden statue. The king's question. The emperor bowed his head. "Zen master, I have read sutras, recited mantras, listened to lectures, and still do not know. Is this mind a Buddha?" Gudo opened his eyes and looked at him for a long time. That gaze is as deep as an autumn well. If I say yes, His Majesty will be complacent, think that he has the Buddha in his heart, and stop there. If we say no, it's contrary to the scriptures, because Buddha nature is inherent in everyone. The emperor was silent. Gudo bowed his head slightly and continued. When you asked, your heart moved. When the mind is still moving, the Buddha is still outside. When the mind is quiet, there is no need to ask. The Buddha is inside. Words are like the sound of water dripping into a rock, soft but piercing. But the emperor still had one thing to end. He asked, "Where do enlightened people after death go?" Gudo replied, "I don't know." The emperor frowned. "You are a famous Zen master. Why don't you know?" Gudo smiled, "Because I am not dead." Saying that, he slammed the stick the floor, and the echo spread throughout the temple. In that moment, the emperor woke up. He was no longer a monarch looking for answers, but a naked man who had just been awakened from a long dream. He bowed his head very low. "I understand. There's nowhere to go, because no one is leaving." Beliefs and the battlefield. Many years later, when the emperor was old, there was a young general named Nunaga in the court, whom Gudo had taught as a child. Nunaga has a reputation for being brave and loyal, but this time he faces an uneven battle. The enemy army is 10 times more numerous, elite and brutal. His soldiers were bewildered, fear creeping in like the cold dew of early winter. The night before the battle, Nunaga entered the ancient shrine on the side of the mountain and lit an incense stick to pray for the god's blessing. The wind blew through the tile roof, causing the candle flame to flicker. He knelt in front of the Guanyin statue and vowed, "If this is fate, please give me a sign to reassure myself." Then he pulled out an ancient coin from his pocket, engraved with different words on two sides. Head, meaning victory. Back, meaning lose. He turned to the soldier kneeling outside. His voice was clear. "Fate will decide. If the coin comes first, the gods have chosen us to win. If I turn my back, I will fight to the end, even if I have to die." The whole army held their breath. The coins flew up, spinning in the morning sun, and then falling, the head facing up. The whole barracks burst into tears. The cry of victory echoed through the mountains and forests. Faith is like a fire that burns, sweeping away all fear. The next day, they rushed into battle, defeating the enemy army 10 times without flinching. Secrets of the coin. Returning victorious, the servant smiled and said, "General, the god is really with you. If there is no good omen from the coin, who would dare to believe that we can win?" Now Naga just smiled and took out a coin of destiny from his sleeve. The servant looked closely, then stunned. Both sides of the coin are all heads. Nunaga said softly, "The gods are not far away. It is in the heart of the person who dares to believe." He did not laugh sarcastically. He was not arrogant. His voice was calm, like someone who had just recited a verse. On the battlefield, faith is a sword. In the mental realm, enlightenment is a shield. The unbeliever loses before he fights. The one who doesn't wake up loses as soon as he wins. final meeting. Shortly afterwards, Naonaga was summoned to the palace and met with Emperor Goyose. He was once a student of Gudo, now a famous general. In the Jade Palace, the emperor looked at Nobunaga for a long time and then asked, "I heard that in the last battle, you invoked the gods with a coin?" Naonaga knelt down and held up the coin. Because when people's hearts are united, miracles come by themselves. The emperor flipped the coin, saw that both sides were the same, and laughed slightly. He used a sound to wake me up, and he used a joke to make everyone convinced. Then the king sighed. Enlightenment and faith are two sides of the same coin. When we are no longer afraid of losing, all actions are free. When we no longer expect to win, all results are clear. Nobunaga bowed. "Your Majesty, I have only learned one thing from the teachings of the Zen master. The person who tosses the coin is the one who creates destiny." Lessons of Two Masters. The story of Gudo and the Emperor, of Nobunaga and the coin, was later recorded in an ancient Zen book with the commentary. One awakens in the sound of the stick. One wins with faith. Those who can see the heart do not need to look for the Buddha. Those who see their own strength do not need to pray to the heavens. From then on, every time someone came to ask Gudo about, "Where is the Buddha?" he just smiled, pulling out a coin from his sleeve. One side is engraved with the word province, the other side is engraved with the word tin. He tossed it up and said, "Either way, if you dare to live fully in this moment, you have won." Later generations have said that, on moonlit nights, when the wind blows through Gudo Temple, the sound of sticks knocking on the floor still echoes somewhere. As the old wisdom reminds, don't wait for the Buddha to show you the way. Don't ask the heavens for blessings. Each person is the one who tosses his own coin. So when faced with fear, remember, fate is not in the face of the coin, but in the hand of the person who throws it. And the greatest battlefield is not out there, but in the heart of the trembling or awake. Trust shapes the battlefield. Enlightenment shapes the inner world. And the coin of life, there is never a loser. Murder. There are thousands of ways, Zen Master Gassan. It's early autumn. Maple leaves fall like flames on the road leading to Gassan Temple. A thin layer of mist covers the mountainside, where the sound of bells melts into the wind like the last breath of an old afternoon. In the meditation hall, more than 30 monks sat in a row, silent like statues. The oil lamp in the middle of the room flickered, shining on the face of Gassan, who was more than 70 years old, but his eyes were still as bright as a spring stream. In tonight's meditation, Gassan did not open the sutras, did not preach on precepts, concentration, and wisdom as usual. Instead, he looked deeply at each of the faces in front of him. Young people, looking for a way to deliverance, and then slowly asked, "Children, I ask you something. Not killing creatures is good, you all know. But if I kill time, is it still good?" The whole meditation hall was silent. A few disciples looked at each other, not understanding what they meant. A little boy timidly replied, "Master Bai, time has no form. How can I kill?" Gassan smiled, as if the answer was just enough to start a big wind in his heart. "Killing time," he said, "is when you let each day go by without waking up. When you sit in the meditation hall, your body is wandering, but your mind is wandering. You are killing the moment of present, killing the life itself that is taking place. No blood, no knife. Just forget yourself in your dreams, and you'll be killed." He stopped, looking into the distance through the window, where the moonlight was drift over the top of the mountain. "Murder," he said quietly. "There are 1,000 ways." Another morning, when the early autumn birds came from the bamboo forest, Gessen called his disciples to the backyard. On the old mat, he placed a bowl of cold rice, a wooden clock, a piece of gold cloth, and a blank sheet of paper. "What do these 4 things," he asked, "have in common?" No one answered. After a while, he pointed to the bowl of rice. "This is the work of the soil, of people, of all species. If I squander, I kill the nourishment." He pointed to the clock. If I waste, I kill the life that is drifting. He touched the piece of golden cloth. If I boast, I kill the humility in my heart. Finally, he held up a blank sheet of paper. If I say things I haven't witnessed, I kill the faith of others. The whole temple yard was silent, as if the air had stopped breathing. Gassan put down the paper and said softly, "Murder is not just a knife. Violence also takes the form of words, of indifference, of lies, and of self-forgetfulness." Another day, an official from the imperial court visited. He wore a silk robe and tiger-skin shoes and said in a confident voice, "Zen master, I heard you preach about compassion. But in the midst of turmoil, how can we maintain order without killing?" Gasson poured tea, but did not answer. He just looked at the leaf that was falling on the porch. The official was annoyed. "What is killing in 1,000 ways? Is the traitor also an innocent victim?" Gasson took a sip of tea and then asked, "Have you ever yelled at a subordinate who caused him to suffer for days?" Quan hesitated. "Yes, but it's for teaching." "Have you ever signed an order without reading it carefully, causing hundreds of people to lose their fields?" Quan was silent. "Have you ever eaten at a lavish banquet when the people were hungry outside the city gate?" Gassan's voice was as light as the breeze, but each sentence was like an invisible slash. Then he said, "None of us can avoid murder. It's just that some people kill with the sword and some people kill with ignorance. And ignorance is the sharpest knife in the world." The official lowered his head. The teacup in his hand trembled slightly. Down. The disciples built a fire and prepared dinner. A small boy clumsily cut vegetables, accidentally spilling a pot of boiling water. He panicked, knelt down, and apologized. Gasson didn't scold. He just put his hand on the little uncle's shoulder and said, "Don't kill yourself with fear. Don't kill your heart with perfection. If you are wrong and learn, that is rebirth." Then he looked at the burning fire in the kitchen, his eyes deep as if he was looking at the realm of reincarnation itself. Don't kill the people you love with silence. Sometimes a kind word can save a life. That night, in the meditation hall, Gassan said again, "Someone kills someone else's dream with contempt. Some people kill trust with lies. Some people kill love with control. Some people kill their youth in nonsense. And there are people killing the Buddha in their own minds by preaching the Dharma without enlightenment." The whole meditation hall was silent. The sound of the wind passing through the wooden door sounded like the sigh of heaven and earth. A disciple asked, "Master Bai, so how can you live without killing?" Gasson replied, "Look deeply. Every action, every word, every thought is a seed. If it sows suffering, it is killing. If it sows awareness, it is giving birth." The next day, when it was still foggy, Gassan walked down to the bank of the stream. He watched the water flow and said quietly to himself, "Water does not kill anyone, but people can die from water if they don't know how to swim." A disciple who followed, hearing this, asked, "Master, after all, is there a difference between killing and not killing?" Gassan turned around. His eyes were gentle. "It's different. When your mind is bright, the knife can also heal. When your mind is blind, words can also kill." In the last year of his life, Gassan wrote in his diary in a brief line, "Murder is not just the cutting off of life, but the cutting off of life in every moment. If I live without waking up, then every day that goes by, I'm a little dead." Outside, the maple forest was red again. The sound of the pagoda bell rang for a long time, dissolving into the endless void. And somewhere in the wind, the old teachings still echo. Violence is not just blood, it's every choice that takes life, even if it's invisible. There are thousands of ways to kill people, and there are thousands of opportunities to live to the fullest. The difference lies only in awareness. Am I killing or am I living? When our minds are bright, the world also stops shedding blood. Kassan sweat, Kassan. Early in the morning on Mount Seiran, Clouds wrap around the top of the temple like silver silk strips. The meditation bell rang 3 times, dissolved into the mist, and then fell silent. Kassan sat on the veranda, his eyes looking down into the distant valley where the mist covered the village. He was an abbot known for his strangely calm demeanor. His voice was always slow, his smile was as gentle as grass, and his eyes never wavered. It is said that, even when a big storm knocks down the pine forest, Kassan can still meditate like a mountain, without a ripple of fear. For many years, his disciples came to him to study Zen, not only because of the profound teachings, but because of the peace that emanated from him. Anyone who approached Kassan felt his heart soften, like the surface of a lake after the rain. Therefore, when a powerful lord died, the court sent a letter inviting Kassan to go down to the mountain to preside over the funeral. A great honor, but also a challenge that few monks have ever faced. That morning, Kassan, dressed in a brown robe and simple straw sandals, walked down the mountain after years of wandering around the temple. The spring breeze was cool, but his heart trembled slightly. For the first time, Kassan will have to face kings, generals, nobles, powerful people who are used to commanding and judging. It's just a funeral, he said to himself. Whether the living or the dead are just a manifestation of impermanence. But deep down, there was still an unusual feeling, like a small wave that had just touched the seemingly motionless cliff. The funeral was held in the great hall covered with brilliant gold. The scent was dense, and the light reflected on the large bronze Buddha statue in the middle of the hall. Hundreds of guests, nobles, and soldiers stood in a line, all heading towards the old monk descending from the mountain. When Kassan entered, all eyes were watching. One expects to see a majestic, calm-spoken, meditative master radiating every breath. But when he opened his mouth to chant, his voice suddenly trembled slightly. A drop of sweat rolled down his neck, then add a drop. His undergarment was soaked. His hands trembled slightly when he held the bell, and the sound of the bell was out of rhythm. For a moment, Kassan felt fear, not afraid of others, but of himself. He realized that all the calmness he had once had in the mountains now dissipated like smoke before the wind. In front of the gaze of 100 people, his mind was no longer the surface of a calm lake, but a sea of waves. The funeral ended in silence. No one criticized, no one commented, but Kassan knew. Inside, something was broken. That night, he returned to the temple. The moonlight shone on the stone-paved meditation ground, and the mountain wind blew through the bamboo groves, making a rustling sound. Kassan sat down, cold sweat still on his forehead. A disciple brought tea, saw that the master was silent, and immediately knelt down and asked, "Master Bai, are you having a hard time today?" Kassan looked at the disciple and replied softly, "I, not qualified to be a teacher." The disciple was surprised. "Master, why do you say that? You're the calmest person we've ever met." He smiled, but in that smile there was a bitter taste of realization. Calm in the temple is easy. Calm in the court is difficult. I thought I was at peace, but it turned out that I was just safe in a familiar place. Today, in front of you, I tremble. I do not tremble because I am afraid of them, but because my heart still has a place to cling to. Then Kassan put down the teacup and looked at the small oil lamp in front of him. This lamp only lights up when there is no wind, but if it goes out in a storm, it turns off immediately. I need to be a lamp that burns in the wind. The next morning, as the disciples gathered to listen to the Dharma, Kassan came out and said succinctly, "From today, I will leave the position of abbot. I went back to school for 8 years. You stay, keep the temple, keep the meditation." No one understands. No one dares to stop it. It is only known that their most revered teacher, who once taught that the heart is like a mountain, is now descending the mountain to learn how to be a real mountain. 8 years. No one knew where Kassan was or what he was doing. Some people say that he went to beg all over the villages. Some people told me that he worked as a hired laborer, carried rice, threshed rice, and lived with the poor. It is reported that he hid among the stonemasons at the foot of the mountain, knocking hammers day by day, meditating at night amidst the sound of metal. But everyone who has met him says he is no longer like the Zen master on the mountain in the past. His gaze was deeper, his voice was softer, and his smile seemed to understand the suffering of the world. 8 years passed like a sigh. One autumn morning, Kassan returned to Seiran Temple. The disciples ran out to greet him. They thought they had met someone else. There was no new brown shirt, just a patchwork shirt. There was no longer a noble demeanor, only a wordless calmness. Kassan knelt in front of the Buddha statue, making 3 kowtows. A young disciple timidly asked, "Teacher, are you still shaking now?" Kassan looked out onto the veranda, where the sun fell yellow on the bamboo leaves, and said softly, "When I wanted not to tremble, I was still afraid. Now I let things shake, and it settles down." Shortly afterwards, an old official came to invite him down the mountain, this time to preach before the king. The disciple was worried. "Will you accept the offer? If the king reprimands, isn't it dangerous?" Kassan smiled. "If the king is angry, it's the king's business. If I'm afraid, that's my business. Each person can only master himself." And he went. During that sermon, hundreds of people listened. Kassan said very little, only told a small story. "Once I went into the world, and I trembled. 8 years later, I'm back. And I'm no longer trying to keep anything. Between the peasants or the kings, between the cries and the cheers, I am still me. For I understand, there is no world outside the mind. There is only the mind, which is reflecting itself in countless mirrors." After that session, someone asked, "Zen master, how do you achieve that equanimity?" Kassan replied, "By not trying to achieve anything. Just live in every breath, whether it's in the mountains or in the middle of the market." Later in life, Kassan wrote a single line in his diary. "When I sweat in the middle of the court, it's not a failure. It's the beginning of true wisdom. Wisdom is not in words, not in teaching, not in sitting. It lies in the unshakable center, in the midst of the storm, in the ability to hold oneself in the midst of so many upheavals. People who live in the pagoda only know how to rest in the shell. A person who is safe in the middle of life, only then can he truly know selflessness. And sometimes, just a drop of sweat is enough to wash away 1,000 illusions of enlightenment." The Buddha's words, "There are 3 things. No matter how much you try to hide them, they will eventually come to light: the sun, the moon, and the truth. The truth is like the moonlight shining through the clouds. No matter how thick the clouds are, the light still finds a way to creep through, to remind us that nothing can be hidden forever. Man can hide from others. He can deceive the whole world, but he can never hide from himself." The Buddha once taught, "We are what we think. With thought, I create the world." The world we see is not outside of us. It is a mirror of the mind. When the mind is full of fear, everything becomes threatening. When the mind is full of compassion, all things are gentle. Just one thought of goodness, the whole sky inside will change color. If you put together the entire Zen journey, it can be captured in one breath. Catching statues, to catch people. When we cling to form, we forget the spirit. The statue is not the Buddha, but through the statue, we see the shadow of ourselves in the Buddha. Eating porridge to understand generosity. A bowl of porridge is not just food, but humility. Eating gratefully, living enough, because being full or hungry is only temporary. Flip a coin to believe in yourself. Between the 2 sides of doubt and belief, sometimes it takes a small act to see the mind clearly. A coin does not determine the future. It only reflects the beliefs we already have. Killing time is killing. It's not just knives that kill people. Every minute we waste in vain is a piece of life that is silently cut off. There is no need for blood, just indifference. There is already the death of life. And sweat to become a master. No one attains true wisdom without ever trembling. Kassan's sweat is the melting pot of the ego. Only when we dare to face our fears can we truly know what peace is. All these stories are not to praise any character, but to reflect on ourselves. Among us, there are people who catch statues, people who eat porridge, people who toss coins, people who kill time, and people who are sweating to learn to be humans. Each person is a life lesson, and when we are awake enough, we will see it is all a unique journey. Meditation does not teach us to run away from life. It does not teach us to leave the city and go to the mountains. It does not teach us to avoid pain, but to find peace. Meditation only teaches us in the middle of life and still be free. Freedom, not about letting go of all constraints, but knowing that we are not bound by anything. In the midst of the noise, we can still hear the breath. In the midst of the hurry, I still knew I was going. In the midst of praise and criticism, we still maintain inner silence. That is freedom. That is meditation. One night, someone asked Kassan, "After all these years of study, what do you understand about people?" He replied, "I understand that people don't need to look for the Buddha, because in every breath, the Buddha is there. But people always look elsewhere, so they never find it." And when asked, "What is enlightenment?" he smiled. "Nothing special. It's just that you know that when you're washing the dishes, when you're breathing, and you're laughing when you're laughing. Simple, but it's extremely difficult. When night falls, the sun hides, the moon appears, and the truth is still there, no brighter, no darker. Just like the human mind, when it is no longer covered by greed, hatred, and ignorance, it is itself a light." Finally, Kassan left only 7 words on the paper: "In the middle of life, and still be free." Tranquility, a breath in, a breath out. If you are reading these lines in silence at this moment, know that this very moment is Zen. Nowhere else. No other time. Just live fully in one breath. Live as if this is the first and last moment of your life. Then all questions will be dissolved, and only the light of truth will remain, like the sun, the moon, and the unconcealed mind. Story 7, Enlightened Vision. That morning, the wind was light like the world's first breath. Under the canopy of the Bodhi tree, the leaves gently shift in the early light. They don't just move, it's like they're whispering something, a language that only the earth, the sky, and the static people can hear. The Buddha sat there, peaceful as if he had never been born and never perished. There was no throne, no court, only a slab of green moss, and his shadow stretched out to the ground. A group of disciples surrounded, silent. They wait. Because for many days the Buddha did not speak. No teaching, no theory, just sitting and watching the wind pass through the foliage. Outside, quiet. Inside, a floating storm. Among those disciples, some were kings who left the throne to go to monasticism. Some were scholars who had memorized thousands of verses, and some were thieves who had returned their salaries. They come to him with faith, but in each person, there are still undercurrents. The desire to understand, the desire to achieve, the desire to be enlightened. A young monk couldn't help but bow his head and asked, "Venerable One, we have heard many teachings, but what is the ultimate truth? What is what an enlightened person can really see?" The Buddha looked at him. "Don't speak." It was not gentle, it was not solemn, it was indescribable. It seemed to reflect the whole heaven and earth. He raised his hand and pointed to the ground. A breeze passed, sweeping away the golden dust. "King, gold and silver, dust." His voice was as light as the wind, but it fell into everyone's heart like a heavy stone. "Silk shirts, rags, universe, sesame seeds. The lake is big, the oil drop under your feet." He is not teaching the Dharma. He is breaking the Dharma. Every word is like a sword, slashing at each value that people still worship. Listeners bowed their heads, some frowned, some shuddered. An elderly monk trembled in his voice. "But Venerable One, if everything is small and empty, then what is the meaning of life?" The Buddha remained silent. Birds chirp overhead, leaves fall. "Break to see to let go." He raised his voice, this time deeper, as if echoing from the ground. Scriptures, magic, meditation, Rocky Mountains, nirvana, daytime nightmare, right and wrong, dragon dance, ups and downs, the sign of the four seasons. The whole forest was silent. Those words were like thunder. A disciple who had spent 10 years studying the Flower Sutra fell apart. If the sutra is magic, then what are those years of recitation? If meditation is a Rocky Mountain, then all the elaborate sitting is just a game? A sense of bewilderment rises, but beneath that layer of confusion, something else is opening up. A silent void. In that void, they realize. Perhaps they have never seen it before, but only think that they have seen it. One petal, 10,000 words fall. The Buddha looked around. The wind had calmed down. The light crept through the leaves, shining a pale yellow band on his face. He bent down and picked up a lotus petal that had fallen on the ground. He held up his petals, twirling slightly in the sunlight. Didn't say anything. No one understands. There was only one person smiling. It was Katie Epp. The smile was small, like the surface of the water rippling slightly. The Buddha said softly, "It is called lotus. It has covered the flowers. Calling the mind Buddha has covered the Buddha." He dropped the petal, letting it fall. A small click sounds when the petals touch the ground. The listener suddenly saw a strange thing in his heart, an immense silence, without boundaries, without meaning, without name. Between yes and no, just breathing. After that session, some people rewrote the sutras, some people still sat in meditation, and some left to travel. But it all carries that image in his heart, a petal falling in silence. A monk asked his teacher, "Master, what do you say when you hold up the flowers?" He replied, "He said nothing. We're the ones who talk too much." In each monastery afterwards, people still recall that moment. The enlightened laugh and the unenlightened preach. But they all felt something was looking at them through every form. It was clear there was no need for anything more. One night, after many years, an old disciple returned to the Bodhi tree. He knelt down, quietly looking at the foliage. "Blessed One, I have read all the sutras, but the more you read, the farther you go." The wind shook the branches gently. A leaf fell, perched right on his hand. He suddenly remembered the old saying, "Form equals emptiness. Emptiness equals form. It's no different." The other leaf is the form. The moment it touches the hand, it's emptiness. Neither of them tried to exist, but they were still fully present. And in that moment, he suddenly understood what years of non-sutra, no dharma could teach. Enlightenment is not about seeing anything more. It's about not being obscured by anything. Let go to see, seeing that there is no longer me. Let me know. Let go I want. Let go of me. 3 floors of doors. If he walks through, he will see that there is no door. An old monk said, "When I was young, I meditated to find the Buddha. In the middle of my life, I taught the Dharma to teach people. Now that I'm old, I just sit and listen to the leaves fall. The falling leaves are the Buddha, the wind blowing is the Dharma, and silence is the way." There is no place without a Buddha. When the Buddha left the Bodhi tree, he looked back one last time, not for attachment, but as to say hello to an old friend. For it was there that he saw clearly. Everywhere is a place of enlightenment if the mind is no longer seeking. He said to his disciples, he sees the emptiness of a leaf. He also sees the hybrid nature of the universe. A disciple asked, "Venerable One, what must we do to achieve that?" The Buddha smiled. "You can't gain what you don't lose. Just be clear that there has never been a nobody to achieve, and that's it." Silence at last. That night, the moon rose behind the mountain. The light spilled over the meadow. A few disciples were still sitting there, not wanting to leave. A light breeze blew through, and the Bodhi leaves whispered, as if the old voice was still here. Enlightenment does not increase, does not decrease. Only clearly sees what is already empty. One person recorded, transmitted. 100 years later, 1,000 years later, the story is still being told, but no one can say, "I understand." Because if you understand, you are lost. Only when there is silence, only when there is no one in us who is listening, does the Buddha appear. Nothing needs to be achieved. There is nowhere to go. It is only clearly visible, like light shining through clear water, not adding, not subtracting. Let go of I know, let go of I want, and I let go. At that time, passing through the sun and rain, sitting in the middle of the market or meditating hall, it was all under the shadow of the Bodhisattva. Story 8. The cat's head dies, Zen Master Sozan. The morning on the mountain was covered with dew. Each thin puff of smoke from the curved roof of the pagoda rises, dissolving into the light gray sky. The sound of the bell soon rang for a long time, then fell into silence, like a drop of water touching the surface of the lake without ripples. The wind passed through the pine trees, quietly shaking each branch and leaf that had dried up the night dew. In that space, if you listen deeply enough, you will hear the breath of peace. In the meditation hall, Sozan sat motionless. The dark brown shirt covered his knees, his hands were partially closed on his thighs, and his face was as still as a stone, but as vivid as an underground geyser. The light shone through the wooden door, shining on his face half bright and half dark. It is said that whoever can sit still like that means that his heart has dissolved into heaven and earth. A young monk walked in. He was very young, thin, with bright eyes, containing the eagerness of a newcomer to the spiritual path. He had heard the name Sozan for a long time, a Zen master who could use just one sentence that could awaken a person's entire life. He knelt down, made 3 prostrations, and then asked in a trembling voice, both respectfully and waiting, "Master Bai, please teach me, what is the most precious thing in the world?" The sound resounded in the middle of a static space like the surface of a lake. A small question, but it carries 1,000 lifelong longings of people. What is the most precious? What is worth living, dying, keeping? Sozan opened his eyes. His gaze was not necessarily directed towards the person opposite, but through him, as if seeing the endless flow of life. He replied, his voice deep and even, not fast, not slow, "The cat's head is dead." The space suddenly thickened. The young monk looked up, surprised. "Teacher, why is it the cat's head is dead?" Sozan smiled slightly, his eyes still as calm as the moon in the clouds. He said, "Because no one can set the price." Then there was silence, without a further explanation. That answer was like a thunder sounding in the clear sky. It made the young monk stunned, not knowing whether to believe it or laugh. A part of him felt offended. How could he use a stinking image like a dead cat's head to talk about the most precious thing in the world? But the other part of him was confused, knowing that behind that statement, there must be something deeper, beyond his understanding. When he walked out of the meditation hall, his head was like a cloud. The mountain wind blew through, bringing with it a chilly air. You sit down by the stone steps, looking out at the forest in the distance, where the trees float in the mist. "The cat's head died," he muttered. An image that is both funny and scary. Why is it? If you want to talk about preciousness, why not say jewels, gold, or wisdom, compassion? Why did you choose something so ugly? He remembered the days when he was a child. In the countryside, he used to see people bury a dead cat. The fishy smell was still in the air, and everyone passing by grimaced. No one wants to touch, no one wants to remember. But now, that image is mentioned by him as a symbol of the ultimate value. He didn't understand. All that day, he didn't eat, just sitting and looking at the lake behind the pagoda. Light wind, yellow leaf falls. In the water, the shadows of the clouds descended, shaking like another world. A child in the village walked by, holding a white cat in his hand. He pleaded and smiled. After a while, the cat ran away, leaving a gap in the child's arms. He called, and then watched silently. That moment, short but made the young monk suddenly understand. We only call it precious when we are afraid of losing, and when it's gone, we forget that it was precious. One day, when the other cat dies, who will want to keep its head? No one. And precisely because no one wants it, it escapes all competition. It goes beyond value, and it also goes beyond attachment. The next day, the young monk went to see Sozan. "Master," he said, "I think I understand you somewhat. The head of a dead cat no one buys, no one sets the price, so it's priceless, because it doesn't belong to anyone." Sozan looked at the student, smiling. "No one sets the price. That doesn't mean it's worthless. It's just the value isn't in the transaction." He got up and walked slowly around the meditation hall. The early light penetrated the door, shining gold streaks on the floor. Humans live in a world of prices. Everything is weighed, measured, counted, from the grain of rice, the soil, to love, prayer. But when the mind only measures, it no longer sees the immeasurable. He stopped, pointing to the door. "Do you see the sun?" "See, sir." "Can you buy a ray of it?" "No, sir." "Compared to gold and silver, which one is more precious?" "The light is more precious." "Compared to your breath, which one is more precious?" He lowered his head, his voice lowered. "Nothing is more precious than breath." Sozan nodded slightly. "Then I get it. The most precious thing is not something that can be stored in a safe or hung in a shrine. The most precious thing is that which is present, alive, and does not need to be named." A gust of wind passed by, shaking the lamp. Sozan continued. "The cat's head died. No one wanted it, no one fought, so it escaped from people's hearts. Just like truth, when it is argued, it is lost." Then he closed his eyes. "Do not look for the most precious thing in the market. Don't look in books either. Look in your own breath, going in and out. If you know you're breathing, you're touching the priceless thing that every king covets." The young monk sat silently. Out there, the sunset is falling. The sunlight fell sideways through the pine branches, red like flames. For a moment, he felt his breath more clearly than ever. That breath. Simple, light. No one needs to sell. No one needs to buy. And it exists as the most ordinary miracle in the world. When night comes, the sounds of insects begin to chirp. He was still sitting there, feeling the cold wind touching his cheeks, feeling the scent of the earth, of the dry leaves, of the warmth of his body. There is nothing left to ask, nothing to understand, only to see. Seeing that the things that are truly precious, light, breath, consciousness, gratitude, are free. They belong to no one, and no one can buy them. Years later, when Sozan died, the story was still being told. The most precious thing in the world is the head of a dead cat. People laughed, saying that he was crazy. But those who have sat still for a long time, heard the wind blowing through the trunk of a tree, felt their breath without a reason, understood. In that seemingly meaningless thing, there is wisdom that transcends all human values. The most precious thing isn't something that's rare. It's something that can't be owned. Sunlight, air, breathing, life. It's all priceless because no one can hold it. When people stop valuing, everything goes back to being itself. When there is no more measurement, the mind is free. When you no longer want to occupy it, love becomes pure. The cat's head is dead. There is nothing left to fight, to keep, to show off. It is no longer a commodity. It is free. The sound of the temple bell echoes softly through the mist, a calm, grounded tone, gentle and meditative. Soft, serene voice, slow and clear, with a sense of spaciousness and warmth. And in that silence, the Zen master Sozan seems to be still smiling, the smile of the one who clearly sees. True value is not in scarcity, but in the unconditional existence of everything around us. Brief pause, faint wind or chime sound in the background. 4 silent monks, Tendai Monastery, the story of true stillness. In the snow-capped mountains of the east, there is an ancient monastery called Tendai. There, the morning mist is always as thick as a silk curtain, and the temple bell rings every dawn, sounding like a drop of time falling into people's hearts. In the monastery, 4 young monks live together for many years. They are all disciples who are loved by the abbot, who practice hard, keep the precepts pure, and meditate diligently. But as people are on the path of learning, they still have a deep longing, a longing for stillness to reach an immovable mind where nothing can shake their hearts. One day, the abbot, an old Zen master with bright eyes and a voice as light as the wind, called all four of them. He said, "For a long time they have said that they want to taste the silence. So try a wish. 7 days without saying a word. No discussion, no signing, no writing, no whispering. Just be silent. Just observe." They saw this as an opportunity to experience what he used to teach. Silence is the door to wisdom. The first day begins with the sound of an early bell. The dawn was like golden silk wrapped around the treetops. In the meditation hall, the four of them sat with their backs straight, their faces calm. No words were uttered. The air in the temple thickened, as if the wind could be heard touching the tile roof. In the evening, they sit and chant in the light of a small oil lamp. The wind blew through the gap in the door, causing the lamp to sway. The light trembled as if it was about to go out. One of the four, the first monk, looked anxiously at the lamp and blurted out, "The light is about to go out. Hurry up and fix it." As soon as the sentence ended, the whole meditation hall fell silent. The other three people opened their eyes to look at him. No one spoke, but their hearts stirred. One had broken the oath just past the first day. After a while, the second monk couldn't help but say, "Have you forgotten? We have sworn not to speak for 7 days." And so the second person also committed the offense. The other two looked at each other, trying to suppress a sigh, but the silence was broken. When one person makes a mistake, it is easy for others to forget themselves. The third monk, with his temper, got up and let go. "You two are so stupid. Doesn't anyone keep silent?" For a moment, the meditation hall became chaotic because of their own attempt to remain still. Three had broken their oaths, and only one remained silent. He, the fourth monk, looked at the three of you with a look of pride. His chest tightened with pride. He thought, "Only I can keep quiet." And, as if to affirm it, he opened his mouth and said aloud, "I'm the only one who is silent." At that moment, the lamp went out completely, and the meditation hall was plunged into darkness. The next morning, the four of them went to see the abbot. They bowed their heads, their expressions both embarrassed and confused. The abbot smiled. His eyes were as gentle as the clouds of the morning. "You see," he said, "four people, four minds. One is worried about the lamp, one is worried about the precepts, another is worried about others, and the last one is worried. Show off your silence." The four of them bowed their heads together, truly silent, this time silent from their hearts. He continued, "Silence does not mean not to speak. Rather, the mind is not disturbed by the voice, not shaken by the fault of others, not bound by form." He walked to the door and looked out. The morning light had just reached the top of the mountain, and the mist gradually dissipated. "You think you are keeping silent," he said, "but in fact, it is silence that is testing you." The four monks looked up. In the light, the shadow of the teacher seemed to blend into the sky. A sense of serenity rises, like the dew soon melting away, leaving in the air the cool smell of earth. That afternoon, each of them looked for a separate corner. The first monk sat by the lake, looking at the water reflecting the clouds. He understood that his mind was shaken because he was afraid of damaging the light of the lamp. But it was actually the light of the ego, wanting everything to be as it was. When he was afraid of losing the light, he lost his composure. The second monk sat under a pine tree, remembering his words, "We must not speak." He suddenly understood. "I didn't say it because I loved the precepts, but because I wanted to show that I missed the precepts better than others." He broke the silence to prove his strictness. It is also a form of the voice of the fall. The third monk, who had scolded the two friends, wandered around the temple grounds. He realized that his anger did not come from the words of others, but from his own frustration. He wanted to see the world perfect, for others to practice as he wished. And when they didn't, he got angry. He understood that the biggest noise was not in the sound, but in the heart of wanting to correct people. The fourth monk, who had prided himself on keeping quiet, sat down in the meditation hall the night before. He recalled the moment when he said, "I'm the only one who is silent." Just one sentence, and he lost all his silence. It is clear to him that pride in silence is also the most subtle noise of the ego. The four of them did not make an appointment, but they meditated together until late at night. No one said anything. No one tried to show that they were cultivating. They just sit, letting the natural breath come and go. This time, silence is no longer the goal, but a consequence of letting go. Out there, the full moon rises behind the mountains. The silver light flooded into the window, touching the four figures who were sitting motionless. There are no oaths, no terms. There is only true silence. Silence that does not need to be proven. The reading ends in complete quiet, with a single deep exhale and the faint echo of a temple bell fading into the distance. Years later, when all four became abbots in different places, they still remember the 7 days of silence at Tendai Monastery. None of them fully overcame the ordeal, but it was this failure that opened the door to enlightenment. They told their disciples, "Silence is not silence. Silence is when the mind is not attached to its own voice or that of others." A young disciple asked, "Master, when others say something wrong, should we correct them?" The Zen master smiled. "If you correct them and your mind is still peaceful, just fix it. If you correct them to prove yourself right, it's better to. Huh." Then he closed his eyes and quietly added, "Don't supervise others. Monitor your own mind. Because as soon as I turned to look at the people's faults, I left the silence." At the end of the story, the narrator, a student of Tendai Monastery, writes on old brown paper, "On that day, the four monks broke their vows, but four doors were opened. Every voice is a lesson. Every mistake is an example. Silence does not come from the lips, but from the depths there is no one to speak or hear." The wind passed through the pine forest again, and the leaves shook softly. In that sound, there is another silence. The silence of the one who understands that all voices are the wind, and that only when we stop fighting the wind can we be truly silent. True silence is not without speaking, but when you speak, the mind remains still. Pig-headed Lord, Zen masters Daigu and Gudo, the story of truth and self. In an ancient Japanese dynasty, there was a famous lord who was intelligent, generous, and loved Zen and literature. He ruled over a vast region, living in the midst of a splendid palace, but his mind was full of questions about life, death, and the meaning of enlightenment. One autumn afternoon, when the fiery red maple leaves floated on the palace stream, the Lord sat in his meditation chamber, his eyes looking into the distance. He said to the servant, "I have it all, power, wealth, beauty, wisdom, but my heart is still empty. I want to understand Zen, understand the truth." The courtiers heard this and discussed it. One person said, "There are two famous Zen masters in the region, Gudo and Daigu. Both are revered, but the styles are very different." And so the Lord commanded them both to come. The next day, Gudo arrived first. He was an elegant person, with a voice as light as silk and a gentle face. The Lord received him in a room filled with incense and the soothing sound of koto. After a few greetings, the Lord asked, "What is meditation, Master?" Gudo smiled and replied, "Meditation is a mirror of reflection. Like still water, when you look in, you will see your true nature." God listened, nodding continuously. "It's profound. I still know that I am a smart person, and I can grasp that quickly." Gudo smiled. "That's right, God. With his discernment and virtue, enlightenment would have come easily. Words are as light as the wind, cool as spring water. God feels comforted, affirmed." He thought to himself, "It's really someone who understands me." Gudo left in the sound of the bell, leaving a sweet aftertaste in the hearts of the nobles. The next day, it was the turn of the Zen master Daigu to be invited to the palace. Daigu was older, short in stature, and his eyes were as bright as fire. He walked in without bowing down, without saying elaborate greetings. His shirt was simple, stained with sugar dust, and his straw sandals were worn. The Lord saw it, frowned slightly, but still kept the ceremony. "Zen master," the Lord asked, "I heard that you have attained deep enlightenment. Tell me what Zen is." Daegu looked him straight in the eye, was silent for a long time, and then replied, "Meditation is nothing." The Lord frowned slightly. "Nothing? What do you mean?" Daegu smirked faintly. "You are smart, but your heart is full of noise. How can you hear Zen's silence?" No one in the palace had ever dared to tell God like that. No one dared to look into his eyes so frankly. No one dared to tell him, "Noisy." Anger flashed in his heart. But then, instead of getting angry, the Lord sneered. "It's strange. Yesterday, Gudo said that I am wise and easy to understand, and you criticize me for being noisy." Daegu replied briefly. "Gudo gave you honey. I give you bitter medicine. Which one cures the disease? You know for yourself." The Lord laughed out loud. Laughter hit the wooden ceiling like thunder. Then he was silent. His gaze changed. No longer that of someone who wanted to be praised, but that of someone who was looking straight at the truth. "You say I'm noisy, but where am I?" Daegu closed his eyes and said softly, "You are in the very echo of the self." The air in the room calmed down. The fallen leaves on the veranda could clearly hear every sound of touching the ground. The servant held his breath. The entire wide arc was left with only the breath of two people and an invisible thread that connected silence and awakening. That night, the Lord could not sleep. He recalled two meetings. One side was a compliment as smooth as a spring breeze, and the other was a rough sentence like a hammer. But the strange thing was, the compliment made him feel good, and the scolding made him sober. He walked out into the garden. The bright moon covered the rocky courtyard. A bat flew by, its shadow falling on the ground like ink marks. He looked at the moon and sighed. "Maybe I just want to hear what suits me. I'm looking for Zen, but I expect others to say Zen the way I like." For the first time in his life, the god felt ashamed, not because of anyone else, but because of his own complacency. The next morning, he ordered, "From now on, I want to study with Daegu. Let's build a small temple in the forest so that I can go there every day." The pagoda was finished, so simple that the servants did not dare to believe it. Only a few wooden booths, straw roofs, bamboo poles. He temporarily left the palace every week, put on a brown robe, and walked up the mountain. The people called him by the rustic name that Daegu gave him, Pig's Head. When he heard it for the first time, he rolled his eyes. "Why did you call me that?" Daegu laughed, "For his head is as thick as a pig's head, full of smug and ambition. Call it that, so that every time people mention it, you remember that you are learning to be a human being, not a god." Everyone around was afraid, but the Lord just smiled and bowed his head. "If the name helps me learn, please keep it the same." And from then on, in the temple, no one called him Lord, only called Pig's Head. He swept the yard, grouped the kitchen, washed the dishes, and brought firewood like all monks. At first, he was clumsy, forgetful, or narcissistic when scolded. But gradually, the laughter, the sweat, and the nights of meditation in the mountain rain changed him. He realized, "No one presses my head, only my ego is heavier than the throne." Once, while carrying water, he saw his shadow in the well. The reflective face is no longer proud. He smiled and said softly, "Pig's Head, you seem lighter today." A year passed. Daegu called him over. On the table was an old mirror. "Look," he said, "what do you see?" The Lord looked and replied, "I see myself." Daegu nodded. "Wrong." The Lord is amazed. "So what do you see?" "I see no one." When there is no one to see, that is Zen. The sentence was like the wind blowing out the lamp in my heart. There is nothing left to say. There was no one left to ask. Only the silence spread, covering the space between them. In that silence, the Lord understood that meditation is not about becoming enlightened, but about becoming nobody. There are no good people, no stupid people, no right people, no wrong people, just the breath that is passing through. Since then, the Lord has no longer studied Zen for realization. He just lived, sweeping the yard, cooking rice, sitting and watching the clouds drift. Daigu looked at him occasionally, smiling slightly. Now the pig's head has turned into a Buddha. Later, folk told that story as a legend. It is said that there was a lord who was once called the Pig's Head, because it was that name that freed him from pride and illusion. When he died, only 4 words were inscribed on the tombstone written by Daigu. No head, no pig. No one understood the meaning. But those who have ever sat under the roof of Daigu's temple, listening to the wind blowing through the bamboo forest, have felt that's where the self dissolves and the truth emerges, naked, simple, like a wordless breath. Sweet words are easy to hear, but the truth is awakening. Don't look to the teacher to validate the self. Look for the teacher who dares to smash it. Silent Reform. Zen Master Ryoan and his lost nephew. On the misty mountainside, where the reeds lean their heads in the autumn wind, there is a small pagoda nestled in an ancient pine grove. There, Ryoan lived almost his entire life. No fame, no disciples, just an old teapot and a cracked bell. He was called the Silent Teacher, because no matter who came to ask questions, he would just look or smile and pour tea. No preaching, no scripture, just a quiet presence, which makes one reflect on one's own heart. One day, a person came from the city with bad news. He bowed his head and said, "Teacher, your nephew destroyed the property. Day and night drinking, prostitutes are surrounded. The villagers whispered, and they said, the grandson of the Zen master is so depraved." Ryan didn't say anything. He just put down the teacup gently. The tea was not cold, but his heart was quiet. He looked out into the distance, where the mist was rolling like thin smoke around the valley. Everything is born, dissolves, like breath. After a while, he said softly, "A horse that runs wild is also a horse. When it gets tired, it will find its way back to the cage on its own. I'm going to visit him." Rion's nephew used to be a smart, educated teenager. At the age of 17, he followed his teacher to study sutras, meditating every morning. But when he went down the mountain, he saw the brilliant streets, lanterns, singing, laughter. His heart gradually tilted. At first, it was just a glass of wine, then a night of play, then week after week, month after month. The inheritance left by his parents is gradually dissipated, like rain washing the sand. His old friends avoided him, and the villagers looked at him with pity and contempt. One morning, he woke up in the middle of the motel room, his head aching, his wallet empty. Next to her, the prostitute was still sleeping, and her lipstick was still on her collar. He looked at the ceiling and saw that the cobwebs shook slightly. A sigh pops out, but not deep enough to change anything. That afternoon, Rion appeared at the gate of his house. No notice, no mailing. He stood still, in a brown shirt, holding a bamboo stick in his hand. His figure was small but steady like an old pine tree. The nephew saw it, and his heart tightened. How many memories echo? The meditation lights, the sound of the wind through the bells, and the slow voice of the teacher. He knelt down, but Rion held out his hand to stop him. "No need for ceremonies. I'm just visiting." No blame, no mention of the past. The two entered the house. The smell of alcohol remains. Messy glasses. Rion didn't raise his eyebrows, nor did he look around to investigate. He just sat down on the mat, looking out at the yard, where the afternoon sun was spreading gold on the old tile roof. "Have you lived here for a long time?" "Yes, more than a year." "Is it fun?" The nephew raised his head, embarrassed. "Yes, it's normal, sir." Ryan smiled. "Normal is precious, as long as your mind is calm." A gentle sentence, but it fell into the heart of the grandson like a small stone thrown into the surface of a floating lake. He wanted to say something. He wanted to confess. He wanted to ask for forgiveness. He wanted to justify himself. But Rion remained silent. The two sat like that until the sky faded. When the first moonlight came out, Rion stood up. I have to go back to the mountains before dark. Help me tie my sandals. My hands are shaking so much. The nephew hurriedly knelt down. His hand gripped the old rough straw rope, round by round, knotted by button. In front of him were his thin, hardened feet, feet that had walked through many roads, through rain, through snow, through human lives. Rian bent down, his voice as soft as the wind. People are getting older day by day. Let's take care of before this hand is as trembling as I am. Saying that, he turned away. No more words. No blame. No preaching. Only the shadow of the brown shirt gradually disappeared in the mist. That night, the nephew could not sleep. That phrase, "My hands are shaking, tie my slippers for me," kept ringing in my head like a little bell. Why don't you blame me? Why didn't you scold? Why only talk about trembling hands? He looked around. The house was full of luxuries, but his heart was empty. He looked at his hand, still strong, but trembling slightly. Not because of age, but because of shame. For the first time, he saw himself clearly. Not a bohemian person, but a child who avoided himself. The sound of the wind passing through the gap in the door was like the teacher's words, "Take care." The next morning, when the sun had just risen, he went to the river bank, looking for the prostitute who was still waiting at the tavern. She looked at him and smiled. "Are you drunk with me again today?" He shook his head. "No, today I just want to wake up." She sneered, thinking he was joking. But when she saw his eyes, bright, quiet, she knew something had changed. He turned his back and walked away, not looking back. The straw slippers sank to the wet ground, making a soft sound like a promise. From that day on, he cut out alcohol, sold his leftover luxuries, paid off his debts, and returned to his hometown. He reopened his father's shop, working hard. No one believes that change. The villagers said, "I must have run out of money, so I just woke up." But he smiled, not clearly. Every morning, he got up early, washed his face under the well, looked at his hands. Now he wasn't shaking. Every night, he lights a small lamp, sits still, does not pray, does not chant, just silently thanks. 3 years later, Rion went down the mountain again. He saw his nephew sweeping the yard in front of the shop, with a calm appearance. The two met, their eyes met in silence. No one says, "I've changed." No one says, "I'm proud." There was only a smile, light but deep, like a leaf falling in the right place. The nephew poured tea, and the two sat on the veranda. The tea is smoking. It's winter. After a while, Rion said softly, "What have you learned?" He looked out at the river. "I learned that who can't be forced to be better can only be reminded to return." Rion nodded, his eyes as warm as the sun. "And who reminds me?" He bowed his head. "Your trembling hands." The two laughed. Nothing more is needed. Later, it was said that the Zen master Rion had only converted one person in his life, his bohemian nephew. But it is that one person that is proof of the power of silence. No need for power, no need for orders. Just a moment of sincerity, a simple action, can shake a human life. Words forced to produce resistance. The compassionate silence touches the roots again. A person changes not because they are taught, but because they are reminded that they still have light within. Uncontrollable temper. The afternoon sun fell on the mountain, and the last of the sunlight fell on the surface of the silent pond. In the courtyard of Bankai Temple, a gentle breeze blows through the old pines, carrying the sound of bells from the meditation hall echoing in the distance. The sound spreads, as thin as the breath of heaven and earth. A young disciple hurriedly walked in, his expression full of confusion. He has been coming here for many years, sitting in meditation, sweeping the yard, chanting every day, but his heart still contains a thunderstorm that has not ended. He knelt down in front of Mr. Bankai, his voice trembling. "Master Bai, you have a bad character. I'm easily angry and hot. I tried hundreds of times, but still couldn't control it. I'm afraid I'm not worthy of being a cultivator." Bankai looked at him for a long time. His eyes were not sad, not blaming, just as calm as the surface of a lake without ripples. Then he said slowly, "Then show me that badness." The disciple was confused. He looked around, looked down at his hands, looked at his heart. Nothing to point. There is no shape that can be called badness. Master Bai, now it doesn't. It only shows up when someone provokes you. Bankai smiled. If he doesn't have it now, how can you say it's yours? What is really yours? It doesn't come and go like a shadow. What comes and goes, it's just a guest. And you, the landlord. The disciple was silent. The wind blowing through the temple yard seemed to carry away shame. He realized, for a long time, I lived like an empty house, where any emotion could come in, shout, smash, and leave. And he mistakenly thought those guests were himself. Bankai didn't say more. He just lowered his head slightly, like picking up the fallen leaf on the wooden floor. The delicate golden leaf was in his hand, trembling in the wind. The teacher handed it to the disciples. Do you see? The leaves fall, but the plant still stands. The anger fell, but my heart was still there. When you see that place, you are free. At night, the pagoda is immersed in silence. Disciples sit in meditation under the eaves. Every time I feel my breath warming, every time I remember the times I was on fire, I just smile. Ah, that guest is here again. He greeted him, did not chase him, nor did he invite him. After a while, he walked away on his own. In the days that followed, he still swept the yard, still cooked, and still worked like everyone else. The only difference was, he no longer felt that he was being dragged away by anger. He began to observe. Anger came like a cloud came. Sadness comes like rain comes. Then it all went as if the sky was clear again. And you, still the sky. One morning, another disciple came to ask Bankai, Master Bai, I want to learn to control my emotions. How can I not be angry, not sad? Bankai replied, his voice as light as dew. There is no need to control anything. Control is resistance. Resistance is an extra layer of fall. Clearly seen, it's enough. Then he pointed to the lake in front of the meditation hall. Do you see the water? When it's windless, it's clear. When the wind comes, it fluctuates. But either way, it's still water. Anger is just wind. You are water. Since then, in Bankai Temple, everyone has seen that the young disciple who used to be hot-tempered has now become completely different. He doesn't push himself to be gentle. He just looked at things with wordless peace. Once, while carrying water, a friend accidentally spilled all his burden. Water spilled all over the field, soaking the shirt. The tangerine stalk friend apologized. He just looked down and smiled. The water returns to the land. What's the matter? The friend, surprised, asked, You used to be very hot. Why are you so gentle now? He replied, It's not a gentle one. It's just that I know the anger isn't me. The story of Bankai's disciple is passed down forever because it contains a lesson that is bigger than Zen, the way people look at themselves. We often identify ourselves with what is fleeting, with feelings, thoughts, memories, names, successes, failures. But all of those things come and go. Only awareness is the only thing that is constant. Just as the sky is not polluted by clouds, our minds are not damaged by emotions, unless we believe that we are clouds. One day, someone asked Bankai, if the mind is the sky, then why do you still find yourself suffering? He replied, because I only look at the clouds, not the sky. You cling to each cloud, calling them me. But when you step back, you will see everything, all that is passing, only seeing, is constant. And perhaps it was in the moment of realizing that the disciple became enlightened. It is not enlightenment like a dazzling lightning, not a soaring or seeing an aura, but a silent understanding. Every storm is small before the vast sky. From that day on, he still lived the same life as before, sweeping the yard, carrying water, and working in the kitchen. It's just that every step he takes, every breath he breathes, is light. Not because he was in a different life, but because he was no longer dragged away by life. Final lesson. Like Bankai says, what can't be kept forever? Not yours. The one that comes and goes, It's not you. He that sees the coming, that going, is the child. Understanding this, people are no longer afraid of anger, sadness, and weakness, because it is in observing them without judgment that we return to our true nature, the mind as clear as heaven. And perhaps every Zen master, every practitioner, every human being who is looking for peace is just learning that lesson again. That there is no need to get rid of anger, just see clearly where it comes from and that it is not me. Enlightenment is not about becoming perfect, but about seeing imperfections clearly, with love and tranquility. The anger then dissipated, like the dew melting in the sun. Only the sky of the mind remains, still clear, still silent, still as tolerant as in the beginning. Mind in stone. Early in the morning, the white mist covered the mountainside. The four young monks left the monastery and went down to the temple courtyard where there was a large rock. It was where they used to meditate every morning, where the sun rose behind the pine groves, where the birds sang amidst the wind whispering through the leaves. But today, instead of being silent, they started arguing. "What do you think?" said one, pointing to the rock. "Is this rock? Is it a real thing outside of me, or is it just an image in my mind?" Another monk frowned. "Of course it's outside. If you hit your head, you will be in pain. Pain can't be virtual." The third person laughed softly. "You say pain, but the feeling of pain is just a perception mind. The rock is out of nowhere. It is a projection from the mind, a manifestation of consciousness." The fourth person interjected, his voice firm. "Both are wrong. Inside or outside are both concepts. Reality goes beyond those two extremes." The debate gradually heated up, even though the bright wind was still cold. They cited the scriptures, the words of the ancestors, and even philosophy. Words collided with each other, creating a reverberation like the sound of stones rolling into a stream. At that time, Master Hogan was walking through the yard. He paused, looking at the four young disciples who were intoxicated with reasoning. Without a word, he walked to the big rock, a gray, smooth, moss-stained rock, as quiet as the silence of the earth itself. He sat down beside him, lightly stroked the green moss, and asked, "What are you talking about?" One person replied quickly, "Master Bai, we are debating whether this stone is an objective reality or just a subjective image in the mind." Hogan nodded. He looked at the rock for a long time, as if listening to it say something. Then he turned to me. "Then tell me, is this rock inside or out of your mind?" After a while, the third monk, who seemed to be the most learned, spoke up. "Master Bai, it's all projection. There is nothing outside the mind. The rock, the pine tree, even the teacher himself are all in my heart." Hogan didn't speak. He just looked at him and then smiled slightly. "If so," he said slowly, "your head is really heavy. Carry such a big rock in it and still speak." The other three monks burst out laughing. The person who just said blushed and bowed his head. But Hogan didn't laugh. He was still looking at the rock. His eyes were gentle but deep, as if he could see through the surface of an object to the foundation of existence. "Children," he said, "when you call it's outside, you erect a boundary between mind and matter. When you say it's in, you're drawing another boundary between the knower and the known. But reality is not on those two lines. It's just." The wind blew lightly. A pine needle fell on his shoulder. He picked up the leaves and placed them next to the rock. The rock doesn't say it's a rock. The leaf does not say that it is a leaf. Only people speak, and in that speech, the world is divided in two. Then he got up, turned his back, and said quietly as he walked, "When you stop calling stone a rock, when you stop looking for it inside or out, then you really see the stone. Not through concepts, not through the mind, but through silence." In the afternoon, the four monks were still sitting there. No one said anything. The sunset light fell on the rock, making it shine like a jewel. And in that moment, they felt something very strange. The rock seemed no longer outside, nor is it inside. It only exists, like the breath, like the heartbeat, like themselves. One person whispered softly, "Perhaps reality doesn't need to be understood." The person next to him smiled, "Just be seen." Night came. The moon rose behind the mountain, and the silver light shone on the rock. A firefly flew around, and then perched on the cold ice. The four monks remained seated, as if afraid that any words uttered would break the silence that was overflowing. In their minds, so many concepts, philosophies, reasoning dissolve. What remains is only the naked presence of stones, wind, and our own breath. The next morning, Hogan walked by. Seeing that the four disciples were still sitting there, the teacher asked, "Have you found the answer?" One person replied, his voice as small as breathing, "Master Bai?" No more questions. Hogan nodded, smiling kindly. "That's good. When the question goes away, reality has a place to enter." The rock remained there all these years later. Every season it changes its clothes. Spring is covered with green moss, summer is dry and cracked, autumn yellow leaves fall, winter dew is white. But through it all, it is still itself. No addition, no subtraction. The monks of that year have now become teachers of others. And every time someone asks about the nature of reality, they just tell the old story of Hogan and the stone. Lessons from the rock. We, like the four young monks, often live in concept, in the map that the mind draws of the world. We think this is me, this is someone else, this is beautiful, this is ugly. But maps are never territories, thoughts are never reality. Reality doesn't need a name to exist. Like a rock, you don't need to know that you are a stone to be stable in the sun and rain. It exists only, silently, but completely. In today's world, people are also carrying invisible rocks in their heads, prejudices, memories, concepts of self and others. The more stones, the heavier the head, and we call it reflection, worry, understanding. But Zen reminds us, let go of the stone, you can walk. It is not about letting go of knowledge, but about seeing the limits of it clearly. It is not to destroy the concept, but to see what precedes the concept. Seeing without calling names. Knowing without holding. That is wisdom. A young monk once asked Hogan, "Master Bai, then what is reality? If it's not the mind, it's not a thing." Hogan was just silent, tapping the rock lightly with his hand. The sound echoed, clear, bouncing, lingering. He smiled. There, reality is answering you with its own echo. And perhaps in that echo, all questions are answered. Not in words, but by apparent silence, where the rock, the mind, and the universe are no longer three different things. The rock, no need to be understood, just to be seen. Reality, no need to be believed, just lived. And the mind, when no longer carrying stones, is as light as the wind. True prosperity. On an autumn morning, the sky was as clear as a mirror washed away by the long night. The first sunlight falls on the golden rice fields, creeping through the mossy tile roof of the pagoda lying on the riverbank. There, Zen master Sengai was sitting writing calligraphy, the pen in his hand moving slowly, his breathing steadily, each stroke like the pulse of silence. A wealthy merchant came from a distant city. It is said that he is a person who holds gold but does not feel at ease. Wealth is like mountains, but his sleep is full of nightmares. He came to ask Sengai for a special calligraphy, which he believed would preserve his family's fortune and prosperity. He bowed. His figure was crouched, but his eyes still flashed the arrogance of an acquaintance who sent others wrong. "Master White," he said, "I have heard your name everywhere. The teacher's words are written intuitively. Everyone hanging in the house will be blessed. Today, I would like to ask you for a very meaningful picture, a wish for prosperity forever for my family. Eternal prosperity, never ending." Sengai smiled, his eyes gentle but as deep as an ancient well. He nodded slightly. "Okay, but sincere wishes are not to be pleased, but to illuminate people's hearts. Are you willing to accept it like that?" The merchant replied immediately, "As long as it is blessed, I accept everything." The Zen master put down the pen. The black ink seeped into the white paper, and the pen strokes were firm and decisive, without any hesitation. In just a few minutes, he looked up and smiled. It's done. The merchant walked over eagerly. In front of him, a large piece of paper was spread out, and on it, 4 dark words were clearly visible. Father died. I'm dead. He died. The room fell into silence. The merchant was dumbfounded for a moment. Then his face turned red, and his voice trembled with anger. Teacher, are you kidding me? I came to ask for the wishes of prosperity forever that you wrote. All bad luck. Do you want to curse me? He threw the fan on the table, his breathing heavy. Sangai still sat still, his expression unchanged. He waited for the anger to cool down before asking softly, Tell me what will happen if you die before your father. The merchant was stunned. Well, your father will suffer very much. What if my grandson dies before me? The merchant lowered his head, his voice lowered. It's the most tragic thing in my life. Sangai nodded. Do you see then, if everyone in the family went away one after the other in the natural order, father first, then son, then grandchild, wouldn't that be the greatest blessing? You call it prosperity. I call it harmony with the laws of heaven and earth. The anger in the merchant's heart gradually subsided like a wave melting on the sand. He looked back at the calligraphy and suddenly saw that the handwriting, thought to be morning, was now as bright as the sun. These words, death, are no longer the call of loss, but a reminder of the natural flow of life. My father died. I'm dead. I'm dead. Not a curse. It's the music of the cosmic order, where everything happens at the right time in the right place. Sangai continued, his voice slow, as if telling an ancient tale. When I was young, I witnessed a father who lost his son in war. The father, because he was in so much pain, sat for 7 days without eating or drinking and finally died. The whole village called it 2 mornings. But we saw it, just a breakdown of order. When you go before me, when nature is turned upside down, that's the tragedy of the world. He stopped and exhaled softly. So I write this, not to wish death, but to wish the order of life. The merchant was silent. In him, the image of a gray-haired old father suddenly appeared, sitting on the porch, his trembling hands still trying to count money and worry about his son. He remembered that for so many years, he only thought about the prosperity of wealth, but forgot the prosperity of friendship. Sangai saw the change in his eyes and said quietly, True prosperity does not lie in the treasure you accumulate, but in the heart that accepts impermanence. When you can smile at birth and death, gain and die, then at that moment, you have surpassed all poverty and wealth. A light breeze blew into the room. The paper shook slightly. The sound rustled like the breath of life. The merchant folded his hands and bowed, his voice trembling. Master Bai, I see. My wishes are not only for you, but for everyone in the world. Sangai smiled gently. Yes, when you understand true prosperity, you will no longer be afraid of losing. When you are not afraid of losing, you really own it. And when you stop wanting to own, you have it all. That afternoon, the merchant left the pagoda. He rolled up the calligraphy, holding it in his hand like a treasure. On the way back, he stopped in front of the riverbank. The water flowed hoveringly, each ripple rolled, reflecting the clouds and sky. He smiled. This river doesn't hold water, yet it never runs out. Maybe that's the prosperity you talk about. Years later, when he died, it is said that the calligraphy still hangs in the middle of their house. No one dares to correct or replace. Even though the ink has faded, the paper has been stained. Every holiday, children and grandchildren bow down to it, as if bowing to the immutable truth of human life. A child once asked, Grandpa, why do you call it a wish when it's all death? The old man smiled and stroked his hair. Because when you understand that death is part of living, you will no longer be afraid. When you are not afraid, you will know how to live to the fullest. And that's prosperity forever. Sangai's lessons. The prosperity that people often seek, money, fame, the permanence of everything, is really just trying to resist impermanence. But everything in the universe follows the rhythm of birth, death, prosperity, death. Only when we accept it can we see that peace does not come from the outside world, but from the harmony within. True prosperity, Sangai once said, is when you can rest, you can live fully, you can go on, like a river flowing endlessly without retaining a single drop to yourself. And so, under the silent moonlight, the ancient pagoda by the river was still standing. Inside, the old calligraphy was still fluttering in the night wind. On the paper, the words, "Father is dead, I'm dead, I'm dead," are the three breaths of a single thing: life, in the form of impermanence. Just go to bed. One night at the end of winter, the cold wind blew through the gap in the door, shaking the oil lamp. In the small room behind the temple, Taesui lay on a bamboo bed, his breathing weakening. The swaying light reflected on his face, a face so peaceful that it seemed to no longer belong in this world. Next to him, his closest disciple, Zen Master Gasan, sat silently. No prayers, no cries. There were only two people, the teacher and the student, and the silent space enveloped like a great blanket of infinity. Taesui opened his eyes, looked at the wooden ceiling, and his voice was as soft as the wind. "This Gasan! When I'm gone, are you going to rebuild this temple?" Gasan folded his hands and replied lightly, "If you want to, I'll do it." Taesui smiled slightly. "And what if I don't want to?" "Then I won't do it." The old monk asked again. His breath interrupted. "What if no one does?" Gasan looked up, his eyes as still as a lake in the morning. "If no one does, it's okay." Taesui frowned slightly as if to ask more, and Gasan smiled. "Teacher, don't ask stupid questions. Now it's time to sleep." Taesui was silent. Then he burst out laughing, a tired but clear laughter, ringing in the middle of the night like the sound of a temple bell breaking into nothingness. After that laughter, he closed his eyes. There was no sigh. There was no final instruction. There was only a slight breath, and then all fell into silence. Gasan was still sitting there. Don't cry. Don't recite the Buddha. Just look at the teacher, like watching the moon sink into the water. No loss, no more, just a change of form. The next morning, the monks in the temple heard and hurriedly came. Someone asked Gasan, "Your teacher is gone. Aren't you sad?" Gasan replied, his voice calm. "My teacher just goes to bed. When you wake up, you'll probably smile." He then asked, "So are you going to hold a big ceremony and rebuild the temple as you told me?" Gasan shook his head. "There's nothing to build. The real pagoda has never fallen. There is only a tile roof in the heart of the faller." Everyone was silent. No one dared to ask more, because they felt, in Gasan's words, that there was something beyond life and death, something that only those who were no longer clinging could speak so calmly. That afternoon, it was snowing heavily. Gasan went to the backyard, took a bamboo broom, and swept the snow from the path. He did it slowly, very slowly. Every scan was a breath. A young monk came and said, "Master Gasan, in the moment of life and death, how can you still be as calm as sweeping snow?" Gasan looked up. His eyes were gentle. "I don't sweep the snow. I just sweep the mind. When the center is clear, the snow melts. When the heart is cloudy, the snow never stops." The student stood silent, then bowed his head. Gasan continued, "Taesui is not dead. He only rests after a lifetime of awakening. You know, sometimes true wisdom lies not in understanding, but in stopping to think. Like night comes, no one controls the moon to rise, but the moon still rises. Also, when it's time to go, don't worry about the future scenario. Just go to bed." Night fell. The snow stopped falling. Gasan sat in the main hall, relighting his old lamp. The flames flickered, and the light shone on the wooden walls, illuminating two people. One alive, the other invisible. Gasan said softly, "I'm gone, but the warmth remains, because he is truly asleep, carries nothing, leaves only the light of peace." A few years later, the old temple collapsed due to a storm. Gasan did not rebuild. The villagers were surprised. "Aren't you afraid of losing your place of worship?" He replied, "The place where I worship is where I breathe, not where I build. When I am fully present, every breath is a temple. Many people come to them hoping to hear the Dharma. Gasan said only briefly, sleep deeply, eat enough, do it all. Don't let your mind wander in what hasn't yet come. When I really sleep, my mind is as clean as the sky before the storm. And when you wake up, all questions disappear on their own. Human life largely passes in unasked questions. We worry about the future before it comes, make plans for what hasn't happened yet, and then weary of our own imaginations. But for now, it is only open to those who know how to stop. When the mind rests, wisdom is born. When the mind is asleep, life regulates itself. Taisui understood that, so before leaving, he did not leave a long discourse. No will, no philosophy. Just a simple word. Don't ask stupid questions. Just go to bed. Perhaps, in a world so full of noise, we are all deprived of a sleep of the mind, an aimless, unplanned pause where silence heals itself of all fatigue. Prosperity is the acceptance of impermanence. Freedom is knowing how to stop. And wisdom sometimes is just the ability to smile. Go to bed.